Welcome to Bound by Books, a podcast of 5 authors across the genres talking about the one thing that we're all bound by, books. Hello, my name is Sherri Hayes. I write sexy contemporary romance and BDSM romance, and I am joined today by my fellow co-host, Hannah Byron. Byron, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you, Sherri, for starting off. Yeah, I'm on the other spectrum of the romance, the whole romance field. I write historical fiction, historical romance, and I'm from across the pond, the only one of us 5 who lives in Europe. And it's lovely to be here, and I'm looking forward to our topic today.
Speaking of our topic today, Hannah and I thought we would talk about workplace romances. Workplace romances are a huge trope in the romance genre, and we actually have some stories that involve workplace romances. And we're going to talk today a little bit about some of the similarities, the differences, and just kind of see where the topic takes us. So Hannah, why don't you tell us a little bit, we'll start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your book that has a workplace romance in it?
Okay, yeah. Of course, I had to think first when I'll give a short introduction, because my books are basically early 20th century, which wasn't the time that most women had a paid job. So I have to think really, do I have working women in every book? I don't, because I also chose to write books about the first books in the series, that is about sort of higher class girls who usually, or they all went to finishing school, and that was basically the step up to their marriage and hosting a big house, a mansion, and having children, and being society ladies. But in my first book, In Piccadilly Fields, the young heroine is, and yes, her name is, she's French, and she is a medical student. She has just graduated from the Sorbonne in Paris. And she is working, it's First World War, and she's working together with her mentor and professor from the university. And he's training her to become a surgeon. So she's a general doctor, but she's trained to become a surgeon. And the romance, that we will talk about that a little bit later, because I'm very curious. I think it's very different. You write contemporary romance, Sherri. So I guess you have many more women that are actually take active part in the workforce.
Yeah, I was thinking, I don't think I have any women who aren't. I think all of my heroines are working women, because again, my books take place in the modern day. I have everything from a business owner to a CEO of a huge corporation to a nanny, to an FBI agent, a homicide detective. I really cross the gamut of professions as far as my heroines go, and really for my heroes too. I mean, I have several workplace romances, and that obviously, comes into play as to obviously they have to have jobs that are related, at least if they're coming together. But I'm really curious though, when you mentioned that she was becoming a surgeon, how exactly did you set that up? Because you're talking World War I. So that was very unusual for a woman, I'm assuming, to become a surgeon, right? So how did you kind of set that up as far as to get to that place as to decide she's going to be a surgeon. And did you address kind of the difficulties and things in your story to get that, how she gets placed there?
Yeah, well, of course, I did a research whether that was possible, whether women were allowed to become. I mean, it is known fact that they were allowed to be doctors, but to become surgeons. And the only liberty I took, because when the story starts, they are both working in the American hospital in Paris. The hero is an American. He's an American professor who went to the Sorbonne, taught there in 1910, and then decides when war breaks out to stay there and do his part. And his young student, so to say, she comes from a background. She's a adopted child, but her father is a very liberal thinking man, and if she wants to become a doctor or surgeon, he's okay with that. He supports her, and she just sort of rolls in it because also of the war situation. And so it was possible. The only liberty I took is there were, as far as I could find, there have been no female surgeons at the front lines, and she goes to the front lines.
Yeah.
But plenty of nurses, but no surgeons. But there were surgeons working in England and in France, because most of the trench war took place in northern France and Belgium. So all these wounded men that could be transported were either taken to. We can get going very far away from romance, but we will get there.
No, we'll get there. We'll get there. We got to set this up here because I'm kind of picturing, because you need to. One of the things with the workplace romance, and I think one of the things that makes it unique as far as tropes go, is because you're in a working relationship as well. It does create that tension. It really, it automatically creates a tension no matter what, because you either have a boss and a subordinate, or you have two colleagues that are working together, and you have to deal with the challenges that become that, because you could have the best of friends working as a team side by side, and they're not always going to get along. But when you add the romantic element into that equation, that creates a whole other layer of tension and conflict and things like that. Yeah. I actually have 2 workplace romances in my upcoming release. Boys in Blue. Yeah. So it's so Boys in Blue, for those who don't know, is a box set of 2 of my full-length novels that's coming out on September 14th, like a little over 2 weeks, actually less than 2 weeks today. Really a little over a week, actually. And the first book, Crossing the Line, is a workplace romance because he is a single dad, and she is his daughter's nanny. So she's a live-in nanny, so she actually lives in his house and takes care of his daughter. So there's a lot of interaction. So that kind of creates that tension there. But I will say that it's not your typical single dad nanny situation. When I wrote this book, it's part of a series. It was the 3rd book in my Daniels Brothers series. And so Megan, who is Paul's daughter's nanny, she is actually the younger sister of the heroine from the 2nd book, Rebecca. Yeah. So we met her in the 2nd book. We got to know her, and the setup for the 3rd book was actually at the end of the 2nd book. And it really was kind of never meant to be a situation, but literally as soon as I wrote the setup that she was going to move in with Paul to be his daughter's nanny, I knew I wanted to put these two together.
Okay.
I just,
Yeah.
they were such opposites. I just was like, and I love opposites because
Yeah. They're the best.
yeah, I mean, Rebecca and Gage from the second book in that series were total opposites as well, and that was one of the funnest books to write ever. But Crossing the Line was, again, it kind of put that, because it was a boss employee relationship, it kind of put that tension there, as to what, how does the dynamic work. I mean, one of the things that they struggled with in the book is that once they became a couple, she was in the kitchen making dinner and he was like, what are you doing? You don't have to make dinner for me. I don't want you to feel like you have to cook for me. When, because his daughter had gone away for a little bit to go with her grandparents.
Okay.
Anyway, so it's just the two of them. And he's like, I don't want you to feel like she's kind of like, what do you mean? I cook for you and, Chloe all the time. What are you doing that? But anyway, it was, you run into those types of situations, whereas I have almost an opposite working relationship in the second book in that book, in this box set, where they're colleagues. They're, he's a small town sheriff's deputy. She's a big city detective. Again, you get that opposite thing going there. But they just have to work. They have to work together to solve a murder. So
what's the title of that book?
That one's called Seducing Janie.
Oh wow! Because I quickly want to recap to Crossing the Line. Does that actually refer to the workplace romance? The title.
It's actually a play on both, because Crossing the Line, it had the original cover actually had a police tape, the yellow police tape. I'm not sure if you guys have that there in Holland.
Yeah, but I know
right
movies.
So it had the yellow police tape on it, and it said "Do not cross." So crossing that line, because there is a murder. They are trying to solve. Paul is trying to solve a murder in the book. But
what is his job then?
He is a homicide detective. Actually, him and Janie of Seducing Janie are partners. They're detectives together.
Okay, so you have related content between all your books in that respect.
In those two, yes. And yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, because again, when I wrote Paul's book, when I wrote Crossing the Line, I was, Janie obviously had a fairly big role because she's his partner at work, and they're solving this murder.
But there is no romantic. There's no romance between these two. Okay.
No, those two do not have the romance. It was all Paul and Megan. But then, like I said, I saw, like, I fell in love with Janie as I was writing her interactions with Paul and stuff. And I'm like, I have to write her book. I have to give her her own book. I have to let her find her happily ever after, which is how Seducing Janie came to be. But I knew that I didn't want her to, like, I knew she, Paul wasn't the right person for her. And I knew, like, I was like, who am I putting with her? Because she's such a strong character. I mean, to be a female cop in general, it takes a lot of of gusto and a certain type of person, because it is a male dominated field and it is very physical. So I wanted to, Janie is not a wallflower by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm sure that your character is not either in this book that you're talking about, because if she's going to be a surgeon, she probably had to fight tooth and nail to be a surgeon.
Well, yeah. Well, the thing is that Agnes is actually the softest of my heroines. She's very dedicated to her job, and she's just very good at her job. But she's quite an introvert, and she's very, very much in love with her professor, who's 10 years older than she is. But she doesn't. at the beginning they don't know they have this working relationship. So she doesn't even know whether he's married or not. And she the problem comes when he decides to go to the front and leaves her behind in Paris. And she says, I want to go to the front as well. But her father says, no, that's way too dangerous. But what happens then is that her mother has passed away at birth. So there is like a housekeeper in the house who is like her mom. And she's killed by what is called the Paris gun. That was a huge gun they projected on Paris. So the housekeeper dies actually on the operation table when Alan and Agnes try to save her. And then she says, I want to go to the front. I want to save as many lives as I can. I am of much more use. So she's very certain and assertive in her job. Alan is in love with her as well. He's in a bad marriage. He's married to a very flamboyant Paris artist, but she's just going off with other men. But he will never approach Agnes because he's such a gentleman. He would never even let her know that he has feelings for her. So they really, very much to the end of the book, they work together without knowing of each other.
That's actually really interesting.
Yeah. So what happens is he arranges his divorce behind the scenes. And actually on Armistice Day, so on the Liberation Day, he proposes to her because but he doesn't know at that moment whether she wants him.
Wow, that's like, interesting.
And
you sounds like it's a very, very much a slow burn type, like a really, really slow burn romance, which is probably like completely opposite of mine, obviously, because I write sexy contemporary. So, but I will say that doesn't mean that my characters jump in bed like in the first chapter, because I have been known to make my readers wait an insane amount of time to get to the to get to the good stuff, I guess you'd say. Now, I did want to ask you though, because you kind of touched on that, and it's really interesting because you said your love interest has a 10-year age gap. Well, the age for Crossing the Line, the age gap is 13 years, and I know that for mine and Crossing the Line, I really play on that age gap a lot now. The age gap I'm assuming now, because I don't write historical, but I'm assuming that the 13-year age gap is probably a more significant age gap in the contemporary realm than it is in the historical realm, because in the historical, as you get back in history, it's less uncommon to have 10, 15, even 20-year age gaps between the male and female, versus today you kind of get if there's more than like really like 4 or 5 years, you kind of get that like, oh, there's an age difference. So I'm curious if that plays a role.
I would think with all the changes in age that it would be possible that men were younger even than their lovers or everything. But in my case, I do see what you mean, but these are two equal people. I mean, the equality is that Alan gets severely injured and she rescues him. She reminds all the things he has taught her, and she has to so she saves his life. And when he proposes to her, he says, "You are my equal. I'm no longer your teacher." because what you done, I could not have I possibly couldn't have even done myself, because he
Wow.
knows what kind of so it is a very specific situation in which there is not really like the old genteel man who takes a green leaf or something like it. This is a very, at the end, I mean, it starts unequal, but
Right.
I think that is the same what you say with the nanny and
The single
the
dad.
cop.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that
Because it really is kind of, it starts sort of on an unequal footing, but to be surprising, I don't really play on that part too much in that story. I mean, it's there because they do touch on it a little bit, but I will say that I probably play on the age difference a little more in that story than I do in any of my other stories, because that is I think I'm trying to think back, but I do believe that is the biggest age difference I have, at least yet. I do have one coming down the pike eventually. That's actually going to have I think 20 or 25-year age difference. So it's a
oh yeah
huge age difference.
yeah
But in this particular case, I really played on the age difference in this. When they do finally get together, uh, Paul is very conscious of the fact that he's 13 years older than her. She doesn't care at all. But he's very conscious that, here's this 23-year-old, and he's in his 30s, and he has a kid already, he's been married before, here she is, she's never been married before. So she would literally be, if they got together, she'd be getting a ready-made family. And so he's very conscious about that, and
yeah
she takes to calling him old man. She
yeah
starts
yeah
teasing
okay
him, calling him old man all
yeah
the time.
yeah
It was
yeah
great. It was so much fun. But I will say that I have another book where a workplace romance, their positions, I would say, created more of an issue. The very first novel I wrote, Strictly Professional, her dad gets injured, well, hurt, injured, and he's the CEO of a big corporation in Chicago, and he calls her. She's a doctor. She's overseas with Doctors Without Borders. She's doing work over there, and he calls her and says, "Hey, I've been hurt. I need your help. I need you to come home and run the company for me while I heal, because I don't trust anybody else." And to her, she doesn't know at the time why he doesn't trust anybody else. But she gets there, and her first day as acting CEO, she meets the love interest, Matthew, and he's the head of security, and fills her in that somebody's after somebody's been trying to take down the company and hijacking shipments and things like that.
wow interesting
So you create that tension, but there's also the tension there. It's probably my angstiest romance that I have. So if you like angst, check out Strictly Professional, because it is, yeah, it's pretty angsty. But there's a lot of tension that's created by the fact that she is his boss.
yeah yeah
He
yeah
works for her. So, but
yeah
he's put in a position where
funny
he
that
has to protect her.
funny that you chose that for your first book, the position of the woman on top, so to say. It's an interesting start of your career.
Yeah,
So,
it's I mean, that whole story came about. That was, I think I spoke about it in another podcast. Maybe it was the very first podcast that I did with Danielle. But that story came about, it was actually an evolution of a story that I had been playing with since I was 14. So I was 30, I think, or 20, late 20s when I wrote that story. It published when I was in my early 30s. So maybe I was 30 when I wrote it. Anyway, so neither here nor there. but yeah, so it had been percolating in my brain for a long time, and the woman was always the one in charge. um and but there was never a it was always more of a partnership, and it was always meant to be a partnership. But in this particular case, because I set it in a modern corporate environment, I had to address the fact that she is his boss, and that would create a forbidden type of fruit there,
Yeah.
where they really aren't supposed to be dating, because she has the ability to, fire him.
Yeah. If he does
So
something wrong.
right,
If
but
he doesn't.
right.
Yeah.
But the thing is it also created another level of tension because of the fact that her life was in danger, and it was his responsibility as head of security to keep her safe. So it really created, when I say this, it's angsty. It's pretty, like I said, it's pretty angsty, because you've got all of these elements coming together to create the situation. But it was kind of interesting to play on the fact. Now, do your characters ever have that conversation? Because I know in Strictly Professional, they actually have a conversation about the fact that she's his boss and he works for her, and how they're really not supposed to be together. Do your characters ever actually have that conversation?
Yeah, in Piccadilly Field, yes, they of course they well, it's written from the female point of view, so she has these thoughts that when he eventually tells her that he's married, then it's absolutely off the cards for her that she will, ever be near him. Of course, that is also the time period as well. But I wanted to, maybe it's a bit off topic, but I think another interesting work relationship that I have is in the Diamond Courier. She's not working at the start of the book, but her father owns a coal mine in Kent. And Ian, who is eventually going to be her husband, he is the assistant of her father. And things go totally wrong because she organizes a strike because she becomes, very radical, and he tries to stop her. But Ian never wants to be a coal mine manager. He has one passion, and that is organic farming. And that had just started in England. And
that's a far cry from
this.
coal mining.
Lily knows this. He comes originally from the Highlands in Scotland. His father was a farmer. And so after the war, she becomes her father's assistant. She takes this position. And when they finally get together and have a love relationship, and he becomes a farmer. So that is sort of a different situation.
Now, I want to bring up something. You brought up the boyfriend being the husband's or the father's assistant. That creates a very interesting dynamic as well, even though it's not a workplace relationship in the traditional sense. It kind of is, because even though the man and woman, the hero and the heroine aren't in a working relationship together, having the father, we all know that if you work for daddy.
Well, that is the conflict at the beginning of the book, because he's her best friend. She is an only child, and he's come there when she was only 12, and he's taught her to cycle, and they're best friends. Her parents want her to marry him. She's engaged to him, but she doesn't want to marry him at the beginning of the book because he is daddy's friend. He is part of the establishment. She wants to have a radical life, and she wants to be free and doesn't want to get married to her best friend even. So there is a dynamic in that sense, and he is very worried about her being, trying to set up strikes at her father's coal mine and stuff like that. It's the only time he really gets angry with her He says, you are ripping apart his family. Your father isn't, the bad capitalist that you paint him to be. He actually tries to help his workers. Conditions were terrible. I mean, there were so many strikes in the 1930s.
Conditions were terrible for most workers in the 1930s, no matter what year. I mean, if you were in any type of manual labor.
I didn't even think of that. That is also it. She cuts off, in fact, the marriage proposal because she doesn't want to be fit in this little tight pattern that her parents have set out for her.
That's very interesting. I mean, yeah, like I said, it's interesting because, working relationships in general, because we were just talking about, Paul and Janie's relationship, because even though it wasn't a romantic relationship, there was still, a strong friendship there. And in seducing Janie, you do kind of have almost that three-person relationship going on, because she finds Kyle, she and Kyle are, having a relationship, but her and Paul have had this working relationship for a long time, and he sees that it's, changing, and she sees that it's changing, and seeing how that dynamic, between the three of them kind of, evolve and adjust over the course of the book is very interesting. So I'm sure that's something similar to what is happening with, your three characters there, the dad, the boyfriend, or I should say fiance, since she was supposed to marry him, and, and your heroine, because there is all, people are people. And if you're writing realistic people, you've got to write their emotional conflicts as well and make them believable. And people, people have ties. I mean, you want to, you either want to, make the person happy, and you maybe do stuff to, just to please them, or maybe you do it just to, so the conflict isn't there, or you go the complete opposite path and you want to create the tension. I know in Red Zone, with which is a sports romance, it's the second book in my Daniels Brothers series, Gage and Rebecca, as I mentioned earlier, complete opposite. She is a straight-laced FBI agent, and he is a kind of, I hesitate to use the word playboy, but that's probably the best, the best thing to describe him. He's kind
of, in my time, they would have called him gigolo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In other words, he explains it himself in the best way, because he says, I just don't say no. It's like, if they want me, who am I to say no? But it's interesting because when Megan comes into the picture, Rebecca's sister, that changes the dynamic as well, because Rebecca and Megan have a relationship, an already established relationship, just as, a father and a daughter, or, brothers, whatever. And anytime you're bringing more people into that relationship dynamic, it does have an effect on the romantic relationship, whether or not it's in the workplace, outside of the workplace, it doesn't really matter. But the workplace definitely brings its own unique dynamics because of the pressures.
Yeah, and I think because readers, I mean, all people who have worked in a team or in a work situation know the dynamics of the team and how, romances. I mean, I have seen it happen in my work, that people run off with each other, and then you say, oh, but they were both married to someone else. But it happens, and it has this forbidden aspect to it. So it's very logical that writers take that, because it has the tension, as you say, at its center. And apart from just random people meeting in a bar or meeting on a tropical island, or so it is. But I didn't know that what you said, that it is such a huge trope. I didn't know.
Yeah, it really is a huge trope, because if you look at contemporary romance, even like their even titles, you'll see the word boss or CEO in a lot of titles, and titles that are in like the top 100 of Amazon. So I mean, these are books that sell well in the contemporary romance genre. It's very, very, very popular.
Women are as in high positions as the men.
The men are definitely still in the more high positions. It's usually the male boss, but there are some.
The billionaire, is that the billionaire romances that you talk about?
Yeah, typically they're really like I think there's one called My Billionaire Boss or something like that. So I mean, it is, yes, they are typically billionaire romances, because they're typically the person who is doing
it's the
very
same
well.
With this 50 Shades of Grey, right?
Yeah. Yes. Well, he's definitely a billionaire, or I don't know if he would assume he consider a billionaire. I don't know if she actually comes out and says that he's a billionaire, other than he's just really, really wealthy. But yeah, same situation. Although in that particular case, Anastasia is not isn't employed by him until later on in the books, where she gets a job at a publishing house.
I haven't read it, but I thought she came to interview him in the work situation.
That so was,
and it's not that they meet in a random place.
No,
they meet at work.
Kind of at his work. The setup of the story is basically her Anastasia's roommate, Kate, I believe her name was. I'm sorry, I still remember it. I read it.
It's we don't have to talk.
No, I read it when it was fan fiction. So in my head, there's still Bella and Rosalie. So I'm trying to think of the right things. But anyway, basically, Kate, her Anastasia's roommate, is I believe she's a journalism student, or she works for the college newspaper, and she's landed an interview with Christian Grey. And so she's gonna go there.
I would call that a workplace romance still, because it happens at the workplace where they meet.
That's interesting, because I would not consider that a workplace romance.
Oh, they should both really.
They have to work together, and they have to work together in some capacity, in my view, for it to be a workplace romance. So that actually might be a good question for our listeners. Do you consider a workplace romance the two actually having a working relationship, like they're having to work together, or do you consider if they're coming into contact with each other for the first time at work, at one of them's work? So I'm interested, because that could be, because if the way you're viewing it is the case, then say a person's a potential customer walks into a store, say they walk into, I don't know, an auto parts store.
Yeah, you're right.
Whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't have the tension of something forbidden there.
Not per se, no. I could see it play though a little bit, because you are creating a different dynamic depending on the type of interaction, because if you're walking into a store, maybe not so much, but then I'm thinking, what if you have say a landscape architect, and somebody's coming to them to hire them for a job, then you actually have kind of picked up that dynamic.
Yeah, well, it is. Yeah,
becomes a boss and employee thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's similar with your nanny, in fact. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, it is a blurring line. I agree, but yeah. So I would be more interested in seeing the kind of books where there is a female CEO. You
Mm,
know, I think that is something that would be give
yeah.
it a modern dynamic.
There are a few though. There are a few out there that
Well,
are.
you did it.
I've
You
been
did
listening.
it with the
Yes,
yeah.
I did. I
Yeah.
did. And I mean, I do think that there is a market for it to a certain extent, just the same way as there's a market for femdom novels. I mean, I write BDSM, so I mean,
Yeah.
male dom is obviously still more widely available, widely written than femdom, but there is a decent sized market for femdom as well. So I mean, there I would think there is still a decent sized market for female bosses to be, create that whole workplace romance.
Yeah, or at least that they are like in your book with the FBI cop, that they are sort of in equal positions, that it isn't always necessary in the workplace romance to have a difference in for the tension, that they
Yeah,
are different in income or in position or in
yeah. I mean, I really had I really played on the with seducing Janie. I really played on kind of the danger aspect because when you're going after a murder suspect, and that creates a little bit of a heightened danger there, obviously, because people who if you're pursuing them, and if you corner somebody who's not a great person anyway, they might lash out at you, and as your feelings for someone grow, and they're no longer just a colleague, they're a romantic partner as well, you've fallen in love with them, to put them potentially be okay with putting them in danger. That's again, it's kind of, I think you encountered that a little bit on your end too, because you're talking about you know going to the front lines, them going to the
yeah,
front lines and being surgeons and stuff on the
yeah,
front lines. That's an element of danger. And
yeah,
it's very, again, it creates a whole different dynamic, one that you're not going to really get outside of the workplace thing, because even though you have it, it's not as real, it's real and in your face, because like in a military romance, where if you have a situation where the guy or the girl, whatever, is going off to battle or on a mission or something like that, yes, there's the element of danger and they could die and you could create that tension and stuff, but it's not quite the same, I don't think, as when you are right there in person witnessing something happening or potentially happening in the moment. Because if somebody comes to you and says your significant other has been shot, then yeah, you're gonna have those emotions and you're active, but there is a difference, I think, from being told something that happened after the fact to something that you're in the moment, like you're
yeah,
right there and you're seeing it with your own eyes.
yeah, yeah. That's what happens in my book, where Anya sees that
Yeah.
Alan is shot down, and yeah. So yeah, but I thought with military romance, is that not that they are both in the military?
Mm-mm. Not usually. I mean, it can be, but not usually. I mean, my story, Longing for His Kiss, I consider that a military romance, but it takes place once he's discharged from the military. So he's actually not in the military anymore. But I consider that a military romance because his being in the military is pertinent for the story. It
Yeah,
it is the setup for the story.
yeah,
And if he wasn't in the military, then it would completely change the entire story, the entire setup,
yeah,
the entire
yeah,
reason why they meet. So yeah, so it is definitely different. It's just usually, and in fact, a lot of military romances are after the fact. You have very few that I have came in contact with, at least in contemporary? Now, I'm sure that if you go back
Yeah,
to like
I would
World
say
War
yeah,
II and
yeah,
things like
because
that.
actually there is a working relationship in the Parisian Spy, because when Jean-Jacques returns for the liberation of Paris, they fight side by side on the barricades to liberate Paris. So in that respect, this is a kind of a military. They're both,
Right.
armed and trying to get the Germans out. So yeah, it is. I was thinking before we talked. Yeah, they work together, but only at the very end of the book. Yeah, yeah, and that is in action. I don't know. I think yeah, military romance is a big one as well. It seems that you're right in most types of professional um, situations. You have written books about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I kind of where Danielle and Marianne are two of our fellow co-hosts, where they jump genres. I don't jump genres. I just jump tropes. Like I know some authors just they all they write is military romance, or all they
Yeah,
write is sports
yeah.
romance, and I am completely across the board. I've got female CEOs, I've got femdoms, um I've got homicide detectives, I've got landscape architects, I've got custom home
It's a yeah.
builders. I mean, I'm all over the place.
Yeah, it's a lot of research to find out more about these jobs as well.
It is actually one of the strangest. You always hear that. You always hear the joke that if you're an author, you really hope the FBI doesn't actually like review your search history.
Yeah,
The one,
I know that. Yeah, it's the same here.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah. But
it's
it keeps it interesting, isn't it? I mean, if you only have one type of job, yeah, I have the same. I mean, I'm now currently writing about a man in the Norwegian resistance, and he is a young student. He's a technical student at the time, but he becomes, one of the central figures in the Norwegian. So I will have to figure out all the decoding, all the transcripts, the invisible ink, how they did that, stuff like that. But that keeps
yeah.
so my men have a lot of different jobs as well.
Yeah, but it keeps it interesting as an author, though. It really
Yeah,
does, because you got to do
yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
research and
When
different
I found
research.
out about the organic farming that had started at the end of the 1930s in England, I read a lot about it. I thought it was fascinating, to have my hero. Maybe it's not very sexy, but he just wanted to do that.
About that, because I mean, there is something about watching a man kind of get his hands dirty. Like
There
somebody
you
who
are.
works with their hands, and you really,
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
he loved fresh air, and he was a
yeah.
Scotsman. He
Oh
didn't
yeah.
want to be in this stuffy office and now and then have to go down the mines to check on things. He wasn't happy there. And in his three-piece suit, he didn't want to be in it. He just wanted to be in his overalls.
Oh well, there's nothing wrong with that. I tell you what, I mean,
Yeah,
like I said, there is something to be said. I mean, think about the kind of all the tropes, and I guess it's not really a trope, but the scenarios where you see the advertisements of like the man, all sweaty and in the, like working on a car or something like
yeah,
that. It's the same basic principle.
yeah,
I mean, you really, he's working with his hands. He's, not afraid
yeah,
to, use his muscles and get his hands dirty. So
yeah.
it
Right,
is the
that
kind of things.
yeah. But
Yeah.
I also agree that it is interesting to give our female jobs that are interesting as well, to let them do their own thing, and yeah, and then they meet their love interest, and then fireworks.
Yeah, I mean, I got to keep it interesting, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's plenty. there's plenty of jobs, and I try to diversify my heroines and their jobs, and give them a variety, to make it, again, realistic. I like writing realistic characters, and I
Yeah.
really try to, try to keep on that. Well, with that, we should probably wrap things up. We're out of time. And this was a fun discussion. It kind of went down some rabbit holes, but that's okay. We kind of, I think we touched a lot on workplace romances and the different types and all that. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. And I wanted to share as well that if you would like to watch Hannah and I do this podcast and not just listen to us, we are now on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, Bound by Books podcast, over on YouTube. So you can check us out there. We would love it if you would watch, like, and subscribe to the channel. Leave us a comment on the YouTube channel. Let us know you're watching, what you think about workplace romances. You can also find out more information about all of our podcast hosts, as well as links to our website, the podcast, listen to the latest podcasts, and sign up for our newsletters, just all about us. On our website, our podcast website, which is boundbybookspodcast.com. And you can listen to the podcast either there or on YouTube. But you can also catch us every week at wherever you're listening to this now. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Blog Talk Radio, and SoundCloud at 12 noon Eastern US time, every Monday. So hopefully you will tune in and listen to next week. We will, Tina and Marianne will be hosting the podcast. So you'll have to listen in and find out what goodies they are going to be talking about. But until then, thank you for listening and stay bound by books. Bye.
And good luck with your launch.
Oh, thank you.
Men in Blue.
Oh, thank you. Yes, September
Exciting.
14th. Thanks. All right, thank you all. Bye.
Bye.